My name is Krista Neiman, and I'm a volunteer with the Epilepsy Foundation. I've been involved with this chapter for a really long time. I can't count that high anymore. And I've been involved in the community for 20 years. So our next speakers are going to be Jennifer Kolar and Molly Neher. Yeah? Oh, I was practicing that, you guys. From Atlas Assistance Dogs. Jennifer has been training service dogs professionally for over 15 years. Her experience started with extensive hands-on work training dogs, trainers, and clients in a nonprofit that breeds and raises service dogs. 7 years ago, she was one of the founders of a private for-profit service dog training business operating today in multiple states. And then 3.5 years ago, co-founded Atlas Assistance Dogs, a nonprofit that works with individuals with disabilities to train their own dogs to be service dogs. She has experience and credentials across many areas of dog training, which she told me I don't have to read, but it's about this big, okay? Is that okay?
Yes.
All right. Molly serves as their director of operations and programs. She developed a severe seizure disorder her freshman year of college after suffering a concussion and had up to 15 seizures a day. When no medications or treatments were working to control the seizures, she started looking into getting a seizure response dog. Her dog soon gave her the flexibility to regain the independence that she lost and gave her a passion for educating, advocating, and raising awareness about disabilities in service dogs. She soon got involved with Atlas, where she strives to make service dogs more accessible to people with all types of disabilities. So please join me in welcoming Jennifer and Molly.
Hi, thank you. I'm Jennifer. So today we're going to talk about service dogs, what one is, what they can do for somebody with seizures, as well as many other medical conditions. General considerations, if you're considering a service dog, some of the different training options and avenues you could go through to get one, some of the challenges and rewards of self-training being really what we as an organization work with people on. And then we'll close and we'll talk about some resources for you. And then we're here out at a table throughout the conference if you have other questions and wish to follow up about service dogs or in general. So first we're going to open with poor Molly's faces on lots of things. But because one of the things we'll be talking about is specifically how Molly's dog Reed works with her and to help people really understand what a dog can do for people with seizures, we thought it would be helpful if you have a little bit more background about her story.
My name is Molly. I work at Atlas Assistance Dogs. I work to make it so that anyone who might need a service dog can get one, and I want to tell you how you can join me in making that happen. I was 18, a freshman in college, and overnight I developed a seizure disorder. At the time I was having up to 15 seizures a day, and they were very severe, so I had to drop out of school, move back in with my parents, and it was a really hard time. Basically overnight I lost my independence, my health, any knowledge of what my future was going to look like. I had no idea if I was ever going to be able to go back to school, ever have a job, and so I started looking into service dogs. I didn't know anything about dogs, but I decided that was really the right direction for me to go in. I started doing research, looking at different organizations, but it was a pretty frustrating process. A lot of these places had long wait lists. I probably wasn't even able to get a dog for 3, 4, 5 years, and I was having 15 seizures a day. I couldn't cross the street by myself. I couldn't wait 5 years to get a service dog. So I started looking into private training, found a trainer in my area who was able to help me adopt a dog who had some training, but he was 8 months old, but I still had to put a lot of hard work in. And then 6 weeks after I got him, this incredible thing happened. He started alerting to my seizures, and all of a sudden, I was able to cross the street again by myself. I was able to go up the stairs. And then eventually I was able to go back to school and earn my degree. Now I work for Atlas full-time, running day-to-day operations and supporting our clients. We need your support in funding this position so that we can ensure that anyone who needs a service dog can benefit from one, just like I do.
So I expect Molly's story, at least especially the beginning part of something coming out of nowhere, or the impact on your life, or people that you love, or people that you care about, of having a disability is something probably a lot of people in this room relate to better than many general audiences. And so one of the things we want to help people understand is just how broad the concept of a service dog can be. Traditionally, service dogs, once upon a time, first started out of after World War I and World War II. There's people that started training, that used to train police dogs and military dogs, started training seeing eye dogs. And that started actually in Austria originally and then moved to the US. And then we started seeing some dogs helping with mobility. So you'd see big, hardy dogs. Over time, it's been realized there are many, many different areas that dogs can help. And depending on where you are in the country, you'll see this more or less. But now there are many people, like many of us in the room, that have invisible disabilities. And no one has any idea what might be going on with you or not. But dogs can help with many psychiatric conditions. They can help with alerting and supporting many medical conditions, supporting people, for example, with families with children with autism. Lots and lots of different physical conditions, neurological conditions that a service dog can support. And a service dog doesn't have to be a lab or a golden or a German shepherd. They don't have to be a purebred. They don't have to be from a particular foundation or a breeder. They also don't have to have, under the American Disabilities Act, which our previous speaker did a nice job talking about, what is a disability under the ADA. So I don't need to say anything about that. But what a service dog is then under the ADA is a dog who has been specifically trained to do some task that helps mitigate that disability. And that's it. And they need to be well mannered in public. They don't have to have a vest. They don't have to have an ID card. They don't need to be certified. They don't have to be from a specific organization, be a specific breed. There are no requirements on that whatsoever. That makes it really hard and really easy for people at the same time. Because it's so open, that means that people that don't necessarily have access to a dog through a foundation and whose dog is helping them have the right to use that dog in public. But it also means that people can take advantage of that and abuse that and have dogs that really shouldn't be out in public out there, which makes it hard for everybody. So the good news is a service dog is a really broad concept. And that's something we want to help people understand, that they can probably do a lot more than you realize. And one of the other parts about that is most people don't have just one thing going on. Maybe you have epileptic seizures that you're dealing with, but you may also be dealing with other mental health issues related to that. You may be dealing with other physical issues related to that. There's a lot of things that a dog could be potentially doing to help you. So just kind of helping, we can talk more about this if you have questions later, but there's a lot of different areas a dog can help than people might traditionally think. So we're going to talk a little bit about seizure alert versus seizure response. When we're training dogs that do medical alert tasks, there's some that we scientifically, as a society, understand really well. We understand that dogs respond to scent when alerting to diabetic lows and highs. That's extremely understood, it's well known, it's a very straightforward method to teach and train. We don't understand exactly what it is that we're responding to in seizures yet. There was a pretty recent study that came out in Nature magazine that definitively showed that a group of dogs could detect and definitively alert to epileptic-based scents of somebody having a seizure, that they could show the dogs could detect that scent independently of any other scent that person might have from exercise or resting. And that's the first time I've seen an actual journal scientific article showing that they could detect the scent of an actual seizure. This had nothing to do with detecting beforehand, but they could recognize the scent of that person. And this is a huge possible step forward toward being able to train seizure alert dogs. Right now, we will say we ethically train seizure response dogs, and then what we do is we watch the dog, or we have the people in the household watching the dog and seeing if they do something kind of weird in advance of the person having a seizure. And if so, we start capturing that and kind of shaping it into the kind of alert we want. And Molly will talk a little bit more about that. But that's just one distinction we want to make, is you'll see there's things out there about buying a seizure alert dog or a seizure response dog. And our warning to you is be careful of, organizations should right now really ethically be calling them seizure response dogs, because you can't guarantee the dog is going to alert. We don't understand the science behind that yet. And so that's something just to keep in mind, that we hope they will, but you don't always know. So that's just something to be aware.
So I got Reed about almost 6 years ago, and as you saw in the video, at the time I was having 10 to 15 seizures a day. Thankfully, I do not have that many anymore. Now they're spread out about every 10 days on average. So I was working with a private trainer at the time who told me very clearly that there is no guarantee that Reed will ever alert to my seizures. So we were training him, as Jen explained, for seizure response. What do we want him to do for me during and after my seizures? And we'll go through a few examples with that after. And as it was mentioned in the video as well, about 6 weeks after I got him, he did start sensing my seizures. The first time that I realized what was happening, he started running around in circles around me, tugging at my clothes, and shortly after I had a seizure. So again, exhibiting those weird behaviors that Jen was talking about. And after that happened a few times, we started working on, okay, well, how do we want to train for a different type of alert, because we can't really have a service dog running around in circles and grabbing my clothes in public. That's not exactly appropriate. So we started training. I had a very short amount of time between the time that he did that and then how I would then train the alert that I wanted. So I'll show you a video of how he actually alerts me today for what we trained. This is an actual alert that he did for me. This video was taken about a month ago. We were doing a workshop with some of our service dog trainers, and I just happened to be in the background, if you notice Reed looking up to me over there, when he started alerting me.
So to reset, to get back on, because that's the behavior that I really want.
Notice he's nudging me pretty consistently.
On the platform. If they just stay there, they're not really thinking about where they are anymore. They're just thinking about collecting the food. So I wanted to be very aware.
I'm looking around. Has anyone noticed?
What we want from them. You're going to switch from resetting to.
Oh no.
I'm going to have to interrupt Reed's alerting me of a seizure.
Okay.
I can just do that. Yeah.
Is that comfortable for you with all of us around?
I've had some of the worst places.
Thank you for checking with me. And you won't actually see the seizure, but this is just us getting ready for it. And so something that I would like to talk about is how difficult it can be if and when your dog does start to sense an alert to your seizures. Because that's the goal, right? You get your dog and you really want him to start alerting. That's what I wanted. That was the hope. But then it starts happening, and all of a sudden you have this ticking time bomb. You realize, oh no, this is gonna happen. And that's really terrifying. And you don't want, I don't know about you guys, but I don't really enjoy my seizures that much. And so when he would come and alert me, I didn't want to spend that time training him and telling him, yeah, good boy, you are alerting me, that's awesome. I wanted to run away in the other direction. And I kind of stopped listening to him, and I started believing that it was his fault, and I got angry at him, and all these weird things going on in my brain. And my trainer had to sit me down and say, hey, Molly, you gotta listen to your dog, or he's gonna stop communicating with you, and he's gonna stop alerting you. So thankfully, I listened to my dog, because today he still alerts me, as you could see. And so that's really something that can be a really big challenge to consider, that I was never warned about, that I don't think people really realize. And it's not just about training the dog, it's about training yourself and learning what do I need to do? What are the next steps? Okay, my dog has alerted me. What do I tell the people in the room? What am I comfortable disclosing? Here I was with a group of people that know me, that know I have seizures, so it was a little bit more comfortable for me. Sometimes I'm in a group of complete strangers and I don't really have anywhere to hide, and I kind of have to say, like, hey, this is gonna happen. Don't worry, it's just normal, just wait it out, and kind of a look of panic on people's faces. We just kind of, I had to learn how to deal with that. What's the plan of action? Do you take medication? What do you do? And it's all a learning process that you just have to go through. And so be aware of that if you're considering to get a seizure response dog that you hope is going to become a seizure alert dog. So what else can a dog do that goes beyond alerting? There are so many tasks that a dog can be trained for that are going to help a person during a seizure. And before I go on any further, I do want to disclose that my seizures are actually non-epileptic. So what I'm kind of going to describe here might not make sense when talking about an epileptic seizure, but that's just what it is. It's my reality. So one of the type of events that happens to me would probably be more closely similar to a partial complex seizure, as best as I can understand them. I just kind of space out, lose the ability to interact with my environment, just slowly shut down, and would, if I stay in that state, would eventually go into what would look like an epileptic generalized tonic-clonic seizure. However, if Reed notices that that's going on with me, he can take the necessary steps to start interacting with me and get me out of that. Again, that probably wouldn't work with someone who has epilepsy because from my understanding, you can't really snap out of that if it's epilepsy. But in my specific case, that works. So I will show you what that looks like. This was simulated. And I wouldn't usually just snap out of it as quickly, but he will stay persistent and keep doing that until I'm able to start interacting with him. And if I would end up having a full-on seizure, he will stay in that position, keep me safe, keep me from falling over. He'll stay like that throughout the episode. This is something else that he does. He just stays with me, keeps me safe, keeps me from injuring myself. Then as I'm recovering, just stays with me, comforts me. As I'm waking up, this is a pretty major one for me that helps me. He starts licking my arms, nudging my arms, really gets me going again because I stay very stuck and it's hard for me to get moving again. But there's something about his warmth, his motion that really helps get me out of the postictal phase a lot faster than if he's not around. And then when I'm ready to get up, he also helps me stand up on my own. He allows me to put my weight on him and stand up, so you'll see that. And I'm putting all my weight on him there. Something that's pretty important to me on that one, and I'm sure a lot of you can probably relate, the feeling of having someone else grab you up the floor when you're not ready to stand up, maybe in a way that's painful, that's just not your pace, not the way that you're comfortable doing it. For me, in any case, it's a feeling of, it's another way that I just don't have independence because someone else is doing it for me. Being able to do that at my own time, my own pace, with my partner, really, it's a pretty incredible feeling. And it's just another way that I have more independence in my life. And so I just gave you really a few little examples of what a dog can be trained for, and those are just specific to me. But there are so many more things, so many more tasks that they can be trained to do that are going to help someone with epilepsy or non-epileptic seizures or so many other types of conditions that can help someone gain their independence back and live their day-to-day life the way that anyone else can. That being said, Jen?
One thing I did want to add from the training perspective, just before somebody runs out and says, hey, I'm going to brace on my dog, is that that's something that is a very specially trained skill. We're very careful that the dog's growth plates are fully formed and developed, the dog's at least 2, before we start working with them on that. And there's very specific places we're working with the dog to not hurt them. So that's one thing to keep in mind, that that's not something you just rush out and do so that you don't hurt your dog or risk falling yourself if your dog happens to move. So I want to talk a bit about some of the things to consider about service dogs. And then the other side of this I want to also mention is we've so far been talking about what a dog can do for you if you are the primary person with a disability. The other thing to consider is there are many cases where the person with the disability, you may be the caretaker, and they may not be able to handle or manage a dog on their own. That's also a really common case. And so in that case, it's typically that the person who is the handler, the caretaker, and it could be multiple caretakers to a child, it could be a different person at school, then at home it could be a different therapist, same for adults, that the dog is then typically letting their caretaker know, hey, this has just happened to this person. They're going to alert the caretaker, they're bringing them to them. They're bringing medication to that person, they're helping hold that person in place, doing things like that. But they're supporting the caretaker, which then gives you as the caretaker a chance to actually step away. It gives you a chance to take your eyes off that person for even 2 seconds, to go to the bathroom, or as one person here said, do their laundry. And if depending on the cognitive awareness of that individual who has the disability, it gives them the sense that, hey, I'm not being watched over 24 hours a day by this other person. I myself now have a little bit more independence and freedom. So I did want to bring up that model, just so people are aware of it, that is also protected under the ADA, that then you're a trio. The dog alone doesn't have any rights. The rights are the person with the disability and the dog mitigating them. If there is a handler that's handling the dog, then the trio has the rights. The handler and the dog alone, without the person with the disability, also don't have the public access rights. So it's that trio together. But that is a common use case that people may not think about. They're trying to think, well, how could my loved one possibly handle this dog? This is something to consider. So Molly's talked a lot about all of the great things and some of the hard things with being part of training a dog or having a service dog. I want to talk about some of the things everybody should really think about and if this is for you. One of the things to realize is most people probably in this room or have epilepsy or have seizure conditions would be people that fall in the class of people we'd consider people with invisible disabilities. Somebody would look at you on the street and not know there's anything going on with you. It's a little different than somebody who is walking with a cane or somebody in a wheelchair or somebody where clearly they're relying on the physicalness of the dog. But now you've got a big fluffy neon sign that says, I have a disability. So your invisibleness, which maybe you don't like sometimes because people don't respect you or people don't realize what you need, on the other hand, is now turned into extreme visibility and extreme attention grabbing. And it's probably some of the people have seen here as people have come by the table. And everybody here has been pretty respectful. We've also had a lot of other people walking through saying, oh, can I pet them? Can I pet them? Interrupting, not listening when we've said, no, I'm sorry, they're working. So just be aware that you end up, whether you want to or not, you are suddenly in the public role of being the spokesperson for all other people with a service dog, because people will come up to you and ask questions. They will come up to you and want to interact with your dog. They will ask you, they may be interested and supportive and polite. They may challenge you. They may flat out just say, why do you have a dog? You don't need a dog. So all of those things can happen. In our part of the country over here, we're pretty lucky in that dogs are pretty welcome lots of places, and people are more open here. If you're in the East Coast or the Midwest, people have pretty different experiences. Some of the other things to consider: lifestyle. When you add a dog in your world, and it maybe you already have other pets and you're adding a service dog in the mix, but if you don't have a dog, for Molly's case, she'd never had a pet before. Her trainer had to teach her how to pick up dog poop. She'd never ever had a pet.
It's not easy.
And so one of the things to keep in mind is you've just added, while you have this partner that's going to help you, you've also added a fair amount of burden. You have this living being that you're responsible for. And while they're a service dog, they're also a dog, which means they have all the needs and joys of a dog. They get to play, they get to rest, they get to sleep. They're allowed to get sick sometimes. They need to go to the vet. They need grooming and care and exercise and love. And so all of that stuff you need to think about, how's that going to fit in my life? Making sure you have time for that. Time considerations, are you going to be part of, and I'll talk in the next slide about different ways of getting a dog, but whether you're part of training it yourself or somebody does a lot of the foundation training for you, there's daily time that you're putting into that dog, and effort. One of the things to also think about is a service dog may work for 10, 12 years for somebody. Your needs will probably change over the course of that time period, which means you're going to need to know, hey, before I had my dog doing this for me, well, now maybe I need to train them to do this whole new task. And you're going to want to keep those tasks fresh. So for example, if you don't have seizures very often, Molly doesn't have the problem that she has to simulate seizures for her dog. She has them often enough. But say you're somebody that has them once every 4 or 5 months, and you want to make sure that dog's response stays sharp, that they do exactly what you want to do when you need them. That may mean you're in the position of simulating that you're in the position of practicing, which, as Molly described, is emotionally pretty hard to put yourself in that position. But you need to be working with your dog consistently, maintaining training throughout their entire working life. And you need to be really consistent about it. You don't just get to say, oh, my dog's alerting me, I'm going to ignore it today. Or, well, I really don't feel like taking them out to the bathroom today. You don't get to do that. You do get to have days off, and they get to have days off too. But you really need to be consistent. So your service dog, we really believe, your service dog is not a medical device. Your service dog is your partner. You exist to help make their life good as much as they exist to make your life good. They work really, really hard for you. And they have the right to do that with joy, with compassionate care. We believe really strongly in ethical treatment of the dog and of the person when we work with anybody, that the dog should love what they're doing. It's not okay for them to just sort of survive the day out in public and hate it. It really needs to be something they love, and they need to be trained in a way that they find joy in that work. So just things to think about. And also, as you're selecting a dog, if you're somebody who's got a really, really active lifestyle and likes to be out and about, then getting a more active dog is great. If you're somebody who really is pretty sedentary, likes to stay inside most of the time, then having a calmer dog is something to think about. If your dog is going to be with somebody who needs a caretaker, or maybe is going to schools, you're not going to want a super ball drivey, excited, crazy dog who needs to be able to lay still on the playground while balls go bouncing by. So just thinking through, and then also the little fluffy, cute doodles that are really popular right now really draw a lot of attention. Whereas I know one service dog handler I know says, yeah, she with her big black German Shepherd, people don't come running up to her to cuddle her dog unless they're a police officer, and then they just respect how beautiful the dog is. With my white lab, everybody comes running up because, well, everybody knows labs. So it's just something to think about as you're also thinking about the type of dog, is how that impacts the visibility that you might have. Let's talk a little bit about different approaches. There are a lot of different ways out there to get a service dog. So traditionally, the original model was through nonprofit foundations, where you would apply, and there could be many, many year waiting lists, and each of them usually specialize in certain breeds and certain locations and certain types of disabilities. And if you're lucky enough to qualify for that organization, then they train a dog, and then they, for you, usually until they're about 18 months or 2 years old. And then they have you some transfer training process where they work with you how to maintain that dog, and they have a relationship with you depending on the organization, and support you more or less depending on the rest of the dog's working life. There have, over time, as many people have seen, that there's so many more people that would like a service dog than those foundations can support, that's left room for a lot of other organizations to come out, good and bad. So there are for-profits, many for-profits out there, that some of them that are doing a wonderful job of breeding and raising dogs and trying to sell them to people who have disabilities to help further fill that need. But there's also ones that really are taking advantage of that. I don't know how many people have heard, there was I think it was called Rycon in West Virginia, a case a few months ago where the district attorney ended up shutting this organization down. They were selling dogs for $15,000 roughly to families with kids with autism. And the dogs were attacking the kids. And they'd return the dogs, and then they just resell them to another family. And the dogs were raised and treated pretty horribly, and obviously this isn't helping the families a whole lot. And so while there are very ethical private trainers or organizations, both as foundations and as for-profits that help provide dogs, I just want to put that warning out there that what a fully trained dog means really varies. Even if it's an organization doing a good job and they're selling you a dog, if it's a 1-year-old dog, it's still a puppy. And it still needs to mature, and it's still not going to be perfect in its tasks. So just find a trainer you trust to help evaluate, or work with an organization you trust. There are good sources out there, but just buyer beware. Really know what you're getting into. If you train your own dog, lots of options there. You can start from a puppy and have a trainer or a breeder help select that. If you start there, expect that the dog's going to be at least 2 before they're really in a fully working state, maybe older. Some dogs mature a little more quickly, but most, they're at least 2 before they're super reliable. And you can work with a private trainer from the beginning or at different stages. You could do group classes. You could do all the puppy stuff and obedience stuff and all that in group classes, and then maybe work with a private trainer for some of the specialized skills. You can also work all on your own. Between looking at online resources, there are also multiple groups out there of owner-based trainer support groups where people get together and practice together. The model that we have is sort of a hybrid model. We're really trying to look and say, where is there an unmet need? So there's foundations out there that are serving the needs of people who really aren't capable of training their own dog, that have much higher needs. There's people who could afford to or want to work with a private trainer end to end and really want that extra or need that extra support. Maybe they want the dog to be boarded and trained for 6 months. What we do is we work with people, ours is a hybrid. We work with people once the dog is at least 14 months of age, has foundation obedience, has the right temperament, and then we help people. We have volunteers and trainers that work with people hands-on in private to train you how to do the different disability tasks, how to self-advocate, and how to work in public. So our goal is to bring the credentials or the skill that you might get through the foundations and make it available to the individual person. So just lots of different models of how you might go about getting a service dog. And some of the things with self-training to think about, and Molly described some of the challenges. I'm going to talk about some of the good things. When a dog is just handed to you who has had, say, 2 years of training, but you really don't know what they're doing, it's sort of like handing a race car to somebody who's only ever driven, I don't know, just a simple car that doesn't have any kinks, and saying, okay, here's the manual, off you go. And you're sort of staring at the manual and staring at this fancy, amazing piece of equipment, and you don't really know how to use it. And while different organizations can do a better job of transferring that than others, so you can really understand that, there is this whole transfer process that takes time while you and the dog are figuring each other's language out. So if you're self-training, you form a deep connection with that dog from the start. You guys are problem solving together. You figured out the same language. Usually by the time you're ready to really be out there working as a team, and I'm carefully avoiding the word certification. We do a certification in our organization, but again, that is not a requirement in the US. So I'm just saying, hey, once you're ready to work successfully as a team, but then you and your dog don't necessarily need to say all the different cues you might hear them to say. They just know what you need them to do. You know what they need. You're really kind of thinking together. You learn how to train and problem solve with your dog. That means if your needs change, maybe now you do need the dog for balance and stability work where you didn't before. Maybe you need them to start learning to retrieve other things, or there's lots of different caretakers and you want them to learn different people's names. Whatever it is, you know how to do that with your dog without really having to be completely dependent and beholden to another organization to help you. You're fully involved in their learning, And you've worked with them real world. You've been out practicing with them yourself, out in the different situations that you use day to day. So you've had practice doing that. If you're doing that through an organization like ours, then you have one of our folks there with you, helping you figure out how to handle those real world situations. If you're doing that with private trainers, then they're often private service dog trainers. They're there helping you, or these groups that work together to support each other. But you're the one doing the work hands-on. So there's a lot of benefits to it that you really gain from that, but it is also the flip side of that emotionally difficult part of, say you're somebody that has severe social phobia and anxiety. Well, the only way you're going to get your dog comfortable working in public is to be out in those public places yourself. Or in Molly's case, if you're trying to have the dog do that alert, you've got to get the mindset of, okay, I have 10 minutes, I'm going to have a seizure. Now I need to reinforce my dog and praise them and figure out what next. So lots of things to consider, but there's so many rewards to self-training if it's appropriate for you. There is not a right or wrong solution. It is not that you must work through a foundation, or you must self-train, or you must work through a private trainer, or you must get a certain breed, or you must have a service dog. This is a really individual decision. And so that's one thing to just kind of look at when, we have, if you go to our website, we have a lot of materials on there to help you assess, is a service dog right for me? And if so, what approach might be best for me through different organizations? Just really trying to suss that out, and we're happy to talk to you too. So don't feel like if somebody says, oh, you must do it this way. You don't have to. And you can take your time and you can think about it, and there's lots of different models and lots of different things a service dog could do, or you may decide, you know what, this isn't right for me right now. And that's okay too. So just being honest with yourself and realizing there's no one way it has to go. Kind of in closing, think long and hard about your needs and ability. One other thing I like to remind people about these days with service dog training, if there's something that a piece of technology can easily solve, you don't necessarily, that's reliable, you don't necessarily need to train the dog to do it. So for example, if you're just worried about knowing, does somebody fall? Well, an Apple Watch has an accelerometer that will let you know if somebody falls. But it won't tell you necessarily it's not going to help with the seizure because you're still moving, right? So that it's not going to alert the same way. Having something that lets you know, oh, here's where I left my phone. For example, I'll have people say, well, I always lose my keys. Well, you could teach your dog 100 different scenarios of where to search for your keys, or you could use some technology and then save the dog for the things that are uniquely them, like seeing if they would alert to a seizure, or going to get help and distinguishing the different states of does someone really need help or not. So just one other thing to keep in mind is training is a lot of effort. So use it for where it will do the best good. And just remember, service dogs can do so much more than you might possibly think. And we're here, and we're happy to talk to you and answer any questions.
So as I saw the dog alerting to a seizure and being able to detect a seizure, I thought for someone who has epileptic seizures who was alerted and had a vagal nerve stimulator, that would give them an opportunity to swipe it and hopefully ward off the onset of that seizure. So that would be a helpful technology working with the dog.
That's a great example of combining technology. And it's the same thing we'll say with people that have diabetes. The dog is part of your solution. They are not your entire medical solution. So figuring out how you partner with technology like that's a great idea.
Just, I came in late, I apologize. Like when other service dogs, or let's say a police dog, I don't know what it is with the seizure dogs, but if they retire, or do they just become like a family, like a pet, or would they retire to somebody else, or, when do you know when the seizure dog, not say he's too old, but that they need to,
Good question.
retire?
Sure. So that's a great question, and the answer is going to depend on how you came about having the dog. So if the dog is bred and provided by a foundation, most of those foundations reserve the right to take the dog back. Now, in most of the foundations I know, the person at the point the dog is ready to retire, and typically you know that usually based on you're watching the temperament of the dog. Hopefully most organizations are doing annual kind of check-ins and recertification tests. They're seeing Is the dog, starting to be in any pain? Are they starting to have pain with their hips? Are they starting to have problems doing what they do? Because once dogs start to get older, get pain, they can kind of get a little grumpier, just like we can. And it may not be appropriate to expect them to work like that. So you see with the dog. And then most of those organizations will give people the choice that they can just keep that dog in their household as a pet. Others, they'll say, okay, if the person can't handle that, they would then go back to the foundation. And it depends on the organization, sort of what the process is. Guide dogs, typically the people that were the puppy raisers often have the choice. It could be other family members. In the case of a person's death, often the foundation will just leave the dog with the household, depending on the working age of the dog. It's all different for foundations. If you're the owner and you've done owner-based training, they're your dog. If it's a foundation dog, the foundations own the dog. So it's a pretty different scenario. There's nothing wrong from our perspective and from the self-training perspective of having a pet in the house as well as a service dog. Many foundations don't allow that. So that is something to be aware of. There's lots of parameters I would encourage to make that work well. But then a lot of times if you're relying on the dog, it's figuring out, okay, how will we transition? Foundations and anybody certified under Assistance Dog International has an ethical responsibility if they provide somebody a dog to be part of planning a successor dog for them. Do we have time for one more? One more. Oh, I guess we have two more. We'll be here too afterwards, and you can come grab our info.
I was just wondering, most of the service dogs I've seen have been large dogs. Can small dogs be used as service dogs?
Absolutely. So it depends on what you need the dog to do. If you need the dog to brace and physically support you, obviously you need a dog big enough to do that. But for a dog to smell your breath, to alert you, to nudge you, it can be, I've worked with dogs as small as Chihuahuas. So it can be any size dog that can perform the tasks that help you. I will say you will have more challenges in public with people believing it's a service dog with a smaller dog. That doesn't mean that's not the appropriate dog for you to choose. That's just a warning that I've experienced with those clients, that people question it more because of societal assumptions about what a service dog is. But no, any size that they can perform the task, doesn't matter.
I have a question. How would I start it? Because of the fact of my landlord says only small dogs are allowed in the property. I'd have to have a doctor's permission to have a large dog. How would I train the dog myself?
So one of the ways I've seen people work with that, if you're a state that, like Washington, that recognizes emotional support animals, is you start with them as an emotional support animal, so you have permission to have them there, and then you work with them until they're at a level that they could meet the skills and tests necessary, that they have a specially trained task for you to be a service animal.
That falls under the Federal Housing Act.
Yeah.
So they legally can't deny you.
So, but it's one of the things to be, I encourage people to not pretend a dog is a service dog before they are, and the rights of service dogs in training versus service dogs vary by state. That is not federally protected. So for example, in Washington state, service dogs in training do not have rights in public. Most people don't know that. In Oregon, they do when they're working with a trainer. So it's just things to be aware of, but you don't want to misrepresent that. I think just out of respect for the next panel, are we out of time?
Yeah, we got maybe time for.
Okay, I know you had your hand up earlier.
One more.
And
then, as you said, you'll be in the back.
Yeah.
Do they have a table?
Yeah, we have a table outside, and we're happy to answer any questions.
Yeah.
We're really easy to reach. And Molly will be here for the next panel.
So we had a situation in our hospital where the dog, I work in an LTM, long-term monitoring, and the dog laid on the patient, and the nurses couldn't get to the patient. So my question is, can the dog be trained to stand down when medical people attend to the seizure? Have you seen a dog trained to help?
So is that a case where the dog essentially was guarding the person? It's a real issue, and that's something that we encourage and we work with all of our clients, and I dealt with them when I was doing the private work as well. Anybody has a strong bond with their dog, but the bond you form with the dog when they're with you 24/7 and they see you vulnerable is pretty amazing. And it's something we work really hard with to have people understand you do not want your dog guarding you for exactly that reason, that you need people to be able to help you. And so one of the things we really work with, at least as an organization, and we encourage sort of as public education, is that your dog needs to be okay to be handed off to somebody else.
And I've been in that exact situation where I've had paramedics actually take Reed away from me, or like a paramedic take Reed away from me while the other paramedics were like helping me.
Reed was okay with that.
But I have known dogs that you would never have expected. It was in particular one client who had collapsed, and his lab had walked in and was standing and guarding, and the man's wife had to come in because the dog was like, I'm guarding my man. And so it is something that's a really real consideration. That pressure may be part of the therapy the dog's providing, but I agree, that's part of the thing to consider is the last thing you ever want is your service dog to be guarding.